Welcome to the Do Better podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like and follow. I'm Devin Cole. I'm here with my brother Joseph Kim. How you doing, Joe?
Good man, how are you?
Doing good, man. So first thing I wanted to get into today was just talking about genetics and how much they play a role in athleticism. Um, there's obviously a lot of different factors, but how much of a role would you say plays into genetics?
That's a good question. Really differs, I guess, and I think kind of differs based on what your goal is, right? If if your goal is to reach the NBA, I don't think with my genetics personally, like I could have maxed out everything, did everything perfect. I'm not touching the NBA. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of like just high school athletes, things like that, yeah, they do determine a huge part. But I think you can kind of maximize what your genetic potential is by doing the right things and working hard. Um, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think everyone, even given a perfect childhood and doing everything the right way from a young age, I don't think everyone has the genetic capability to do so. But I think early childhood exposures may play a bigger role in it. Like, what do you? Because I think when people are looking at like what their parents are giving them in terms of coordination and running speed and how they move and everything like that, it may not be as much of a genetic thing versus a what they were doing early on because you're likely to follow your parents' same habits and patterns. So is it in your genes or was it in your actions and your habits as a young child? So I think early exposures can be possibly an even bigger piece of the puzzle. Um, which gets us into our next topic, just talking about like um, sort of from youth stages, like what should we be thinking about, and we can start at like really young, right, like 6 to 10 years old. Um, kind of what parents out there could be doing with their kids. Obviously, we want to keep it fun. We want to be creative, and we don't want to be just being super monotonous. We want them to be engaged. So, what are some things you could see being good for someone like 6 to 10? We'll say.
I think overall it's just having your kid be active, especially nowadays, right? There's so many things you can do, like on the iPad, right? With these iPad kids and whatnot, just at home. You don't have to necessarily go outside to for fun, for enjoyment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so many things accessible, like you just sit down on the couch and there's so many things that can grab your attention. But I think really just kind of instilling, not necessarily sports per se, but like just movement and playing outside and things like that. And then obviously that's like when kids start playing like your city soccer, AYSO, whatever, city league basketball. So just exposing them to the sports and team sports. Could be individual sports too, and just kind of building a love for just sports in general, and not necessarily like because these kids don't know what they want at 6 to 10. They don't know what their favorite sport is. It can change depending on the time of the day. So just instilling, I think, just that like movement and like doing athletic things are fun. I think is a good base to build off for future athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think fun is definitely the primary ingredient in doing that. I think obviously everything you said was on point. Getting them into sports, getting them moving every single day, like be that example at home, right? Like go work out, bring them to the gym with you. If you can do stuff at home, have them watch you. Don't make them watch you per se, but just be doing it around them so that they see it as normal, and they'll obviously want to follow suit.
Mhm.
Definitely, like I think adding like coordination games. Like I've seen, um, like doing a hula hoop and tossing them a tennis ball or something fun like that. Different ways to like get them to explode and like try and like go catch a ball. Like, oh, you gotta run around dad and then go get the ball, or just trying to be fun, trying to be competitive. Just kind of just make up games. Like just try to keep them engaged. But definitely, yeah, get them involved in sports. Don't. It's not so serious. They don't have to be a soccer player just because you made it to JV when you were a junior and you want to live vicariously through them. But definitely get them involved. It teaches them a lot more things other than just how to play a sport. Sports are the greatest metaphor of life. I think Kobe Bryant said that. But
Yeah,
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 so
because yeah, going back to your point about like like showing them like taking them to the gym with you, like doing workouts with them at home. Seems like like kids obviously imitate their parents quite a bit, and you having a young child yourself, like have you started bringing them around to your workouts, like with basketball, any sports, anything like that?
yeah, like when I was playing in adult league, him and Breeze would come to the games. Every weekend we don't do much. So on the weekends, our days were wake up, go for a walk, come home, either go to the gym right after that or wait till after his nap. So Breeze takes him to the gym every day when she goes. There's a little family center at the gym, so it's not like someone's watching your kid. They're actually just split off. There's like some games and stuff for him, and then he can watch
Nice.
Breeze work out. And then same thing um, when we take him to our gym that we had at my work. It was open, so he would just be messing around, give him a ball or something to play with, and then he'd come over to me, see what I'm doing, mess around with him. But yeah, definitely, he's definitely involved, and he sees all the things that we're doing on a daily basis. But yeah, that's definitely something we've made sure to do, and as he gets older, he gets a little more coordinated. I will start adding him into different things, and
Hmm.
thinking about that, I was watching a podcast with Paul Favorites, and he was
Hmm.
talking about how his dad kind of manufactured his love for basketball. Um, One thing was he like always had it on the house, right? He'd have him watch different highlights of like Magic Johnson, I think he was saying, and then during commercial breaks, he would just like come up with a challenge for him, like, "Oh, I bet you couldn't do 50 between the legs dribbles before this commercial's over." And so he'd be like, "Oh, I can do that, Dad." Like, what? And then
Hmm.
start doing it, and then like, "Oh, commercial's over." And then it's like, or if he gets it, you probably couldn't get 60 though. So it's just
Yeah.
trying to have fun ways to add some competition to it and still make it fun. But
Yeah. So I've seen it go the other way too. I remember a specific patient I was treating for ankle sprain. I think after landing, after they're like rock climbing, right? Um, and it got to the point where getting a lot better. Just need to do more athletic things like trying to run, and then they tell me like, "Oh, I actually don't know how to run." I'm just a little baffled. Yeah, and made that same face, not on the outside, but on the inside. You know what I mean? I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" She's like, "I've never really known how to run my whole life. Never done it. Didn't do sports. Parents probably definitely didn't push anything like that." She's like, like she was telling me, she was like, "Oh yeah, I had to like get across the street quickly because a car was coming." And she's like, I realized I don't really know how to run. So it was literally like watching like Bambi learn how to walk, like step by
that's
step, teaching them how to run. But yeah, it is very baffling to me that like just like that's just like a human, like that's just a basic human skill in my
yeah,
opinion. Especially like if you look way back when, right? That was actually our number one skill. It was like
yeah,
endurance, like long distance. Like, we used
what
to
we
just
do.
chase animals for like tens or like 100 miles
Done.
just until they got exhausted, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that is.
so like going back to our previous point about like genetics versus like what you're exposed to, right? Kind of nature versus nurture thing. That is certainly a case of nurture gone wrong.
Yeah, because yeah, you especially don't expect that from someone who's as active. I'm sure she was very fit if she was rock climbing all the time. Like, probably a big
Not necessarily. I
surprise.
think it was more like one of those like just hobbies, like doing it with your friends a couple times.
Oh,
Try
okay.
to land from. Yeah, not the most active person per se, but even then, you would think to know how to jog.
I mean, that's trending on TikTok right now. Like, never seen each other sprint for the first time, and you watch some of these people run, and it's like that is frightening. Like, how do you
Yeah,
not know how to run?
sure. Yeah.
But
So yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe genetically she wasn't gifted as well, but yeah, it
I'm
definitely nurtured that.
yeah, I'm gonna put that on the I'm gonna put that on the childhood exposures. There's no there's no genetics for that don't know how to run. That's bred pretty deep into our
Yeah,
genetics, like you were saying, from exhaustion hunting from thousands of BC. But um, so I guess we're in the what was it, 7 to 12 range, I would
hmm
say, or no, sorry, 10 to 14 range for youth athletes, right? So our base is kind of just going to be have them play a lot of sports, or they won't be able to run like your patient
hmm
before, and then maybe some adding coordination stuff, keep it fun, keep it creative,
right.
give them a very broad perspective of movement, right? That was kind of our 6 through 10 block, and then going from 10 to 14, I think things um, get a little bit different, and we can kind of start focusing in a little bit more. What were some things you were thinking for that age group?
Yeah, so I think this is around the time when kids, especially now, tend to specialize a bit more. Um, maybe they're not playing three, four, five different sports year round. Cut it down to two, usually. A lot of times you'll see kids playing just one sport, right? Like take basketball for example. Um, you know, people, parents chasing that the hoop dreams, right? You get your whatever school season. AU is just a year round, all day, every day kind of deal. Um, I'm not a big fan of just specializing in one sport that early. Still, I think we talked about on our last pod, like maybe once you get into high school, that's when you specialize. But still, I'm a big fan of like the previous like 6 to 10 block where it's a lot of different movement patterns still, and now you're I think working a bit more maybe on the skill component rather than just playing the team sport. Like get out there by yourself or with a trainer, um, and work on the skill component of your sport. But yeah, I'm still a big fan of just movement variety and sport variety. What about you?
I was going to follow up with you. That 10 to 14 range, I feel like at some point in there, possibly starting to do some strength training. Um, what do you think about that? What do you think's a good age range to start getting into the weight room?
So, question. I don't think there's a perfect age. I think definitely at this point it'd be a really good idea. Um, strength training looks very differently with kids. It's more like get the fundamentals, the like body weight stuff right. Um, I think when we were growing up, there was a lot of myth like, oh, if you get into the weight room early, it stunt your growth, and it'll do all these negative things. There's nothing bad about getting stronger at any age, right? Um, you know, even I'm sure like a 4 or 5 year old stronger, like getting stronger, learning how to do like a split squat is like not bad at all. Like these kids aren't going to do it because they're not going to enjoy a muscle burn. But um, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting into the weight room. It's just I will say it might be a bit difficult to find exactly the right person to do it. Um, Not sure if I know a whole bunch of trainers or weight coaches that are working with that age range necessarily. Um, but yeah, I think you know getting the fundamentals of like strength training, kind of what it is, doing it safely, getting the right form and right mechanics down is it's a really good idea to do at this age range.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to just that age block of 10 to 14, like you said, it's definitely about we can kind of start to narrow down what we like, what we don't like. I feel like at that in that age range, they start to have a bit more understanding of what they actually like. So you can kind of leave it up to them on what they want to do with each season. Um, Definitely would recommend keeping at least a second sport. You don't need to be playing basketball 12 months out of the year. Um, Keep that variety because that block is still very crucial for growth, especially in how your muscles work and how everything's functioning. And that's where I think the weight room can be a good thing to implement in that time. Same as you, like just start with body weight squats, have them start lunging, start squatting, just body weight, and then push ups, pull ups. Like you're gonna hit all your bases, make sure they're doing everything right. And from from the weight room to the court to whatever sport they're specializing in, we're really just setting that baseline and that foundation for what they're going to be able to grow upon in that 14 to 18 range, which nowadays with the landscape of how recruiting goes and everything like that is like you're almost going to want to be close to peaking between the ages of 16 and 18, um, which is sort of what I wanted to get into next was that 14 to 18-year-old range. At this point, we have good movement variety. We maybe started with some body weight stuff from 10 to 14. We're still playing sports. And then we hit that 14. We're freshmen going into sophomore year of high school. What are some things that we should be doing?
Yeah, I think like we said, maybe now specializing is you know not necessarily right per se, but it's okay to specialize. I think still playing like another sport, whether it's super serious or not. Like for instance, at our high school, like the tennis team, not very serious, right? But it's like another way you can get active, play a different sport, kind of get away from the grind of playing your main sport every day. Could be a good idea. But yeah, now it's I think a bit more serious about the skill work, more serious about the weight room, maybe a bit more intentional with your work, and really like now it's obviously you still have to love the game, still have to have fun with it. But I think this is now when you can start taking it a bit more serious. I mean, um, what do you think?
Yeah. Did you play tennis one year?
I did. That's why I mentioned
That's
it.
what I thought. Yeah. You
Shot
didn't play volleyball with
boots.
you didn't play volleyball with us though, did you?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. I
I
don't know why I didn't want to play volleyball.
I almost played tennis every spring. I would like go to a practice or two. Our high school coach, he was pretty cool. We would talk to him. We'd always
Yeah,
try to get
boots.
athletes out to go play. But every year I would like go to a practice or two. And then like freshman year, I decided to play volleyball because all the guys were playing volleyball. And then
Yeah.
sophomore year, I was just like, nah, I just want to focus on basketball. Like I don't want to. Didn't seem fun. And then junior year, I decided to do track. And then I mean, senior year was I was still trying to get recruited, so I was still playing. I was just focusing on basketball again. But um, yeah, I think everything you said for that 14 to 18 range is crucial. You can specialize. I don't think there's a problem with just playing the one sport. It's not a bad idea to like do track in the springs. I would stick with spring sports if you're serious because for me, like I played football my freshman year, and it was hard making that transition straight after football into basketball. There was the conditioning aspect, there was the not touching a basketball, and so like the season finishes in like end of October, early November, and then it's like
Mhm.
all right, basketball season starts in 3 weeks. It's like skills weren't quite there, so it took a month or two into the season for me to actually find a rhythm and everything
Right.
like that. So I think spring sports are the way to go. It's far enough out from the season, and they're also not incredibly like nearly as demanding, at least in my experience. Like like they're kind of at least at our high school, they were less serious sports. Like men's volleyball, like okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like, we'll practice a couple times a week, kind of mess around. It was a freshman team. I know the varsity team took it a little more serious. Not to hate on men's volleyball or anything, but like at our school wasn't that serious. It was just we were on the freshman volleyball team. It was our whole. It was most of our basketball team. Joseph didn't want to play, but most of us were there, so it was just the boys. and just having a good time. We were, max effort jumping a couple times a week, learning the new skills. And then same thing with track. Our track team wasn't very good, so it was kind of just like it was just training for me. I run the sprints, do the
Mm-hmm.
jumps. We'd have some weight room stuff. So yeah, I think definitely sticking with the spring sports is a good idea. And then, like I was talking about before, I think that's a good idea for that freshman, sophomore springs. And then obviously after your junior high school season, you're going to need to be getting into AAU. And it's really like kind of where we want to be peaking in a way, like peaking but not peaking, but because like it's a lot of it's riding on that, on those times, right? That live period in April and that live period in July are where you're going to be able to stand out to coaches and um, do all of those things. So just keep building upon those foundations you've been laying out, and then you want to start, kind of progressing that, right? I think it's a good idea to stay in the weight room throughout the season so that so you still have your strength. The season didn't wear you down completely because you're only going to have maybe a month or two, probably less than 2 months before that AAU season starting. So you don't want to neglect all that strength work during the season because you're kind of walking right back into another season. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to do you agree with that? That like from that 16 to 18 range, with how the landscape is now, that we're kind of asking high school basketball players to be polished at those ages?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think obviously you have more experience with it trying to get recruited. It seems unfair that even before your like high school career is done, you're asked to peak, but it makes sense because they have to recruit for that upcoming college season, like a year and a half out,
Yeah.
right? Um, but what do you think about? So you said like you got a month or maybe 2 months before like you have to show out, right, for the college coaches. Um, how much skill work, weight room versus like an individual training versus like live games slash like AU practice? Like, how do you balance that in the season? Because I know you obviously want to deload after a high school season, especially let's say you make it decently far into um, not the playoffs, but like state or divisional and things like that, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah. Yeah. Like we've talked about in the last podcast, I always recommend to take some time off.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, after your junior season, like you really just don't have that luxury, which is why I brought up staying in the weight room throughout the season, pushing as much as
Mm-hmm.
we can, so that like you have to kind of look at it as a marathon because we're not going to be able to peak by the end of high school season and recover, right? It's going to have to be a steady build all the way through that live period, and that live period or that spring summer stage may be even more important than your high school season. So
Right.
um, stay as consistent with the skill work, with the strength work as much as you can, and just have that in mind when your high school season's starting, right? Like you need to be competing. You need to be trying to win because that's very important in terms of development. But
Mm-hmm.
just you have to have in mind, like just because my high school basketball season is going to be over, I'm not done playing basketball, right? A lot of these tournaments, like live periods, the end of April. High school seasons ends middle of February, and then playoffs. So if you're on a good team, you're going to be playing possibly into March. So
Mm-hmm.
just stay in the weight room, keep volume low. You're kind of just going to be maintaining
Right.
throughout that part. And then once we get to, so sorry, I'll back up. So after the high school season's over, right? If you can take a week, AU practices is usually only twice a week. So there's still time to get some recovery and get back into your skill work and see how you can mesh that with your strength and conditioning. And then once that April live period is over, you can kind of take a step back from the AAU for a little bit, kind of use that time to recharge and get ready for that next live period, which is in July.
Mhm.
And obviously, there's high school summer, so it's just a lot what we're asking high school kids to deal with, and that's why like we see a lot of people burning out is because
Mhm.
they don't understand, and there's no one to help them with the load that they're being put through. Like they're playing from, I mean, high school practice starts in at the latest November, and they're playing till July. That's insane. And a lot of them aren't doing a ton in the weight room, and they're just playing basketball, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people getting injured more and more now because there's just so much wear and tear. But if you handle it right and you keep your body strong during those times, it's definitely manageable. You just have to be a lot more strategic. Um, I kind of rambled for a while there, but what do you have
Very good.
any thoughts?
No, that's a good point. Yeah, with the burnout, just because on the grind 24/7, you kind of can lose sight of why you started and why you're playing basketball for sure. Um, yeah, yeah, interesting point about having a peak after your season, which is crazy to me. But um, yeah, so you take the break, and then do you think like upping that intensity in the weight room and the volume and things like that? Like, were you keeping it maintenance level during the season, like you were during the season, or are you trying to make those strength gains for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or a month and a half before that open play time?
I think there's a good time period for increasing the intensity in the weight room, right? Because we have till the I think it's the last 2 weeks of July is usually the live period. So we have some time after that first live period. We
Mhm.
can take a week or two from the court, and then we can just I would say in the weight room we can kind of have a couple deload sessions, like lower intensity, kind of just start bridging that gap between the maintenance phase and um, the next phase, and then we have a good 1 or 2 blocks of training. My trainings are usually or my training blocks are usually 4 or 5 weeks. So we have a couple of those before we're going to need to start getting back on the court and repolishing everything we've been working on. So um, yeah, that middle February till early July gives us about 6 weeks. Mid July gives us 8 weeks. So you have a good block there to really put your foot on the gas pedal in terms of training. Um, Obviously, you're probably still going to have to play some tournaments with your AAU teams. Um, so have that in mind. We have to train around that. Um, but yeah, I don't think there should be a ton of AAU tournaments going on in June. Um, but that's just kind of
Right.
how I attack it.
Yeah, and kind of building off of that. So obviously, there's like we're working on the strength in the weight room and explosiveness like on the court and in the weight room. You got your skill work going on, and I think a really underrated part of all of this that I don't see too many people talk about is conditioning, right? Um, you can be the most skilled, like some of the most athletic person on the court, but as soon as that conditioning right falls off, people's like skills tend to fall off the cliff, right? Like talking about like shooting, even just like being like the primary ball handler. It's tiring, man. It's a lot on your body conditioning wise, like all the bumps. Like watching Jalen Brunson, especially game two, that fourth quarter. I mean, he's getting like he's getting tackled every play, and
Yeah,
just like to me, like it wasn't even the skill of making all the fadeaways and like the pull up jumpers. It's like just that conditioning to be able to pull those things off were the most like things that was the most impressive to me. Um, How do you tend to approach like the conditioning aspect, especially in that portion after the season where maybe you're not playing as many, games or scrimmages or things like that, and it's hard to maintain your conditioning. I think.
honestly, they're playing in that we're still talking that 16 to 18 range. They're playing so much basketball between spring and summer.
Mm.
Um, I really don't worry about it too much.
Yeah.
It'd be more in practices like um, they need to be making sure that they're getting the most out of their reps in practice, right? Like when you're scrimmaging in practice, like pick up full court, if you're
Mhm.
bringing the ball up, like get it there effectively into the spots you want to go. Like it needs to be more of just a conscious effort rather than we're really going to need to be programming it in because they are playing so much, especially in
Makes
that
sense.
June to July timeframe. That's when high school season or summer season will start back up. At least we had that at our high school, where you're
Right.
playing once or twice a week. So it's more just um, being in your client's ear, talking to them like, "Hey, man, make sure you're working on your conditioning right now." I shouldn't have to necessarily program it. Obviously,
Mhm.
we're always going to have some conditioning in our work. Of course, there's a few ways I like to attack that, but um, in terms of basketball conditioning, like you have to play basketball to get basketball conditioned. So
Right.
just be in their ear. They need to be conscious about what they're doing in practice every day. Every time they step on the court, they need to be conscious of it and know that all the effort they're putting in now is going to pay off when the ball gets tossed up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, definitely. I think staying in the clients here and kind of giving them tips and tricks, like you were saying, on how to maximize your conditioning in practice, like with full court pickups and things like that. Just really pushing yourself. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Um, so I guess that brings us to we kind of talked about it a little bit, um, but just we can step back to that. We'll say the 14 to 16 range, right? So,
Mhm.
how should we, or how do you think we should go about prioritizing our skill work and our athleticism? Because at this point, um, we're starting to specialize a little bit more, so that skill work is starting to get all that more important. Um, and obviously, we can't leave our athleticism behind. So, how would you go about prioritizing those two things?
That's a good question. I think differs case by case, right? You get those freak athletes who are not super skilled, and then the other end, they're like, players who tend to be more skilled, maybe because they're not as athletic. Obviously, it's case by case, but I'm a big fan of working on your athleticism with the skill work too. So obviously, we're gonna do our stuff in the weight room, right? Stuff on the track outside the weight room, even just like those max approach jumps and things like that. But how do we translate that onto the court? So if you're working on your vertical but it might not necessarily translate to on the court. What can you do to it is like you can try to work on things that challenge that vertical while you have a skill component. So it's like whether it's like this is in the rehab sense, but I was working with like pretty athletic player, um, trying to have their confidence to come back after an ankle sprain, and it's like I had them jumping from outside the lane, right, doing like reverse finishes, things like all sorts of weird like tough finishing challenges um, that will definitely test your athleticism, but then also testing the skill at kind of that end range, right, that high range. I think that's a good way to do it. But you definitely still got it. You can't neglect one or the other, but I like to tie those things in together if possible.
Yeah, 100%. That is a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up because I actually just saw a video the other day. Um, I don't. It was a video of like I think it was Anthony Edwards and some like different angles he was attacking or something like that, and then it
Mhm.
it pans to the strength and conditioning coach like doing little hops onto a box, and it's like this is how you get that, and it's just like those are just not the same movements. Like don't get me wrong, I
Right.
love low intensive plyos. They're a great tool to use, but
Mhm.
yeah, you need to bridge that gap, right? You can't try and get everything out of the weight room. Try like you just can't. You can't mimic those same movements and actions in 90% of gyms, right? You got to go on a court and how much of these qualities that we're trying to train can we that we're trying to train in the weight room, can we have them do either with a ball in their hand or just with the context of the court in mind, right? So
Yeah.
instead of, like you said, right, instead of having her jump over a box, you just have her jump across the paint and make a layup. And we're
Right.
getting those same qualities, but it's within the context of the sport. And the players are going to be more engaged, so they're going to get more out of it. And we're still getting all the same benefits while also getting a skill aspect. We're
Right.
checking just way more boxes. Like, just because you want a quality that you, I guess, traditionally would get in the weight room doesn't, you can bridge that gap. So that was a great point. Um,
Yeah, like for instance, like you'll see Steph doing these, I don't know, like reverse lays where he's like, it seems like he's in the air for a decent amount of time, right? He's like getting across the lane. He's you know basically out jumping big man almost, or like outlasting them in the air. But and then you go watch Steph in game try like a wide open fast break dunk. He's barely getting a rim raiser. It's I think that like fluid athleticism, rather even if you don't have that raw like Anthony Edwards like jump out the gym kind of athleticism, like you can still develop. Um, and I think a good thing about working on those things is that it'll push your like athleticism to like kind of maxing it out like to the edge of like its capabilities as well as your skill work. So I think when you're like athletically being challenged, like your body is like like, okay, this is like almost 100% of my capacity of what I can do. I think the skill becomes harder to do at that point as well, if that makes sense. Just because it's like you're really taxing your body, right? Super high neural drive and all that, and on top of that, if you're taxing your skill too, it's like you're really, really pushing yourself.
yeah, that was a great point about the coordination piece of it with Steph and how he has hang time but doesn't have the highest vertical. Um, yeah, that was just a good point about it. I agree with that. That's why we do that, right? I think what's it called? Good drills. They do a great job of that. Like, just, and I've started implementing some of those things into my work. Like, on a jump
Mm-hmm.
day, like, we don't have to just go do box jumps. Like, let's go onto the
Right.
court and jump for the rim and just start bridging that gap between the weight room um, and the court.
Yes.
All right. So that kind of brings me to our next point with just bridging that gap and how do we get the most out of the work we're giving to our athletes. Um, when it comes, especially in like a longer process of rehab or something like that, that you work in a lot, when things can kind of get
Mm-hmm.
monotonous, how do you make sure the athlete's getting the most out of what they're doing?
Yeah, good question. So, first off, before really anything, it's just having that trust, right? So the athlete has to trust you, or your patient has to trust you that you're the right person to help them reach their goals. And then, at least in the rehab sense, and I think it'll play in the performance sense as well as like building the athlete building the trust in themselves again. So coming back from an injury, it's you're doing things where you're improving their confidence. Still should be challenging enough, right, to where you're getting adaptations or you're really pushing the athlete, but they're still seeing success or progress in that sense. Um, yeah, what do you think about that kind of mental component part first?
The mental component, yeah, I think that's a huge aspect of it. Um, I think when it comes to getting the most out of them, it's mostly going to be the mental blocks that we're going to have to fight through. Um, I think, like, knowing your why. I like to explain to my athletes why we're doing what we're doing, um,
Mm.
because placebo effects are real, and if you take something that actually doesn't really work, but you tell someone that it works and they believe it, like, it'll work for them. Like, people talk about that with like ATG stuff or knees over toes stuff. Like, um, it's probably just a placebo when a lot of that stuff is working for them. But placebos are a good thing because if they can help you get better, that's what we're really after. So having them know their um,
Hmm.
why we're doing everything we're doing, I think is a good point. Is a good starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good point because, like with my patients, like whether they're 80 something years old or a younger athlete, I think telling them about the why is super valuable, right? Just you get that more buy-in, I think, when you know kind of truly understand what you're doing. Sometimes, right, with some of these exercises, some of these drills, like we're having athletes do, they really don't know the purpose, right? And a lot of times people don't ask why. I think like our high school coach, Coach Hannah, I remember this like specifically one time. Or sorry, no, it was a different coach. Like Coach Pyle was another coach in the program. He had a bunch of us who came from my previous coach mentioned, Coach Hannah. He's like, you guys ask the most questions about why. You guys just don't do it. You guys always ask questions about why. And I think just having that curiosity and just that like right need to know like why are we doing this, right, is super important for buying, like you said, just because that placebo effect for one, but also I think having a sense of purpose with anything in life really is just always a positive. Because if you're doing a drill you don't believe in, you're not going to push yourself. You're not going to go 100, right? You're really not going to get anything out of it. Versus doing something you truly believe in, you're really going to put in that extra effort, I think.
Absolutely. I have a pretty similar story to that. It was right when I got to UC Irvine, and we just
Mm-hmm.
got through our one of our first practices. We were preparing for a tournament in Korea, where we were representing the United States. I forget what the tournament's
Mm-hmm.
called, but so we were practicing all through the summer, and I just got there. I was a freshman, just deer in headlights, really. But after the practice, our strength and conditioning coach, he always run the cool down, and um, he has us put our feet up on the walls, and we're just kind of like sitting there for a while. And he like walks around. He's like, we're doing like belly breathing and different things like that. And
Yeah.
I just asked him, I was like, hey, coach, like, what are we doing? Like, what is this? Like I was genuinely curious. And he just kind of looks at me with like kind of a sour face, and he's just like, just do it. And I was like, oh, like I was just asking, like, I was just curious, like what was this doing? And then he kind of
Mm-hmm.
like walked away, and then later that night he sends me like this big text about like, he thought I was like challenging him or something like that. He was
Oh,
like kind
really?
of apologized for like, coming off the wrong way. And after that, I had a really good experience with him because I redshirted with him, and I
Mm-hmm.
was just just being super curious about everything we were doing. And I learned so much in that time because I would just always be like, hey, like what is this doing? And then after a while, he's just like, when he's explaining something new that we're implementing, he's like, this is what it's doing. He starts explaining it to me. Very intelligent guy. His name's Andrew Mitchell. He was at Irvine. He went to San Diego State men's basketball. He was at TCU men's basketball. As the lead strength and conditioning coaches at all those places. So definitely learned a lot from him. And um, yeah, just knowing your why, I think, is one of the biggest things you can get from that.
So after that mental component, in terms of more of what we're actually doing on the court, in the weight room, things like that. In terms of programming, yeah, how would you structure it? Long term versus weekly, daily, things like that.
Yeah, so I think from a daily perspective, we'll start there. We should obviously have daily movement, right? Go for a walk, um, move your body in different ways, get your steps in, fight resistance in some capacity. I think those are the big three things you should be doing on a daily basis, and you kind of scale up from there. Um, and then I'll move into weekly. From a weekly perspective, we sort of talked about it on the last podcast, just about managing your central nervous system and the work you're putting into it. High CNS days versus low CNS days. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do kind of follow. We briefly went over it last time, but I do follow that high low um, idea for the most part, right? Like, um, And then after that, once you manage that, you kind of have higher days, you kind of have lower days, and then you manage the weight room and the court on those high and low days together. Um, but in terms of movements, you should be sprinting twice a week, jumping twice a week, squat hinge twice a week, and then plyos. You got low intensive to mid intensive to your high intensity plyos, and you kind of just mix those in. Um, could be on a daily basis, and you just scale them up from there. Um, I'll let you get into your dailies and your weeklies.
Yeah, no, I agree with, pretty much everything you said. I think, yeah, that daily part where you said do something at least, right? Even if it's like, let's say it's like your rest day, right? Yeah, don't be in bed all day, play video games all day. Like that's something I did encounter a lot working with like the current generation of high school athletes. I think, especially like they're very into video games and things like that. Like it's another like competitive aspect, right?
Yeah,
Um, you know, MJ's Michael Jordan's vice was gambling competitively, but um, it's just something about just sitting all day in front of the screen, right? Like do something, go on a walk, move a little bit, like really go shoot some hoops, like in your slides, like you know, just like messing around, like just super light movement even. And then yeah, weekly, like you said, you got to get those exposures. Definitely the sprinting aspect for basketball players is, like we touched on last pod, it's very important just because we don't get it in enough ever if we do it all. So yeah, I agree with you in terms of like the daily and weekly, just the basic fundamental things that we should have.
yeah. Oh yeah. So when it comes to our weeklies, I kind of wanted to get back into our CNS conversation about that high low aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a lot of times coming up, I would, if I was having a pretty intensive day in the weight room, I would always try and have a lower intensity day on the court, and I would kind of mix and
Yep.
match like that, and that can kind of cause issues. Can you speak to just your nervous system low, your neural drive, how that kind of works throughout a week, and how that can be a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think a lot of people actually end up doing what you do in terms of like, hey, if I work super hard in the weight room, let me go light on the court, right? Either to save my legs per se, or just because they think they can't push as hard that day. So if looking at a lot of the research and what a lot of people like trainers and really a lot of people have used like so, like in the league and at high level sports. Generally, like a super high intense, whether it's on the court, off the court in the weight room. That takes about 48 hours for your central nervous system to recover from. Whereas something pretty light in terms of like, let's say you just go on like a pretty light jog or like a light bike ride, you just get on the gun and just shoot some set shots, not putting up like a million shots like Kobe did or something, but just get up a couple hundred. Those things you tend to recover within about 24 hours. So um, that's why I think it's a good idea to stack your intense days together. So it's you go intense in the weight room and then you go intense on the court. The next day you're gonna bring those skills intensities down, right? So maybe you're not really getting in the weight room, or if you are, it's more low intensity stuff like some core, right? Some sort of little movement snacks in terms of mobility. Just some things if you need to work on your ankle mobility per se, like work on those things, um, and getting the light work. So kind of going like the peaks and valleys, right? And this is for across any sort of athlete, not just basketball. Like you could literally just be working for trying to be a bodybuilder as well. Um, you want to have those peaks and valleys just so you're maintaining your fatigue levels because it's like you don't want to necessarily have to take a lot of time off or like a deload, like a true like deload where you're really not doing anything just because you're so fatigued and you just have to build kind of back up from the ground to hit that point.
Yeah. For my low intensive days, something I like to add in is like isometrics.
Mm.
They're usually a little bit heavier, but from what I know about isometrics, it's not incredibly straining on the whole system, and it tends to actually lead to quicker. You get quicker recoveries out of it, um, and especially for basketball players, like getting on that leg extension almost every day is a good idea, and doing your isos just get the blood pumping back to that quad and to that patellar tendon. Um, so yeah, like mixing those high intensive days in the weight room, I think an easy way to go about that in terms of programming is from like the start of your workout. I'm going to be doing for like my act or my dynamic warm up. I'm usually start with some low intensive plyometrics and kind of build up into high intensive plyometrics. Somewhere in there, there'll be some quick twitch work that really gets your central nervous system firing, and you start getting that blood flow going out throughout the whole body. And then we'll kind of
Mm.
get into more power movements. If that could be some sprints, or it could be a like a push press or something, some sort of power movement, whether it's in the weight room or out on the track. And then usually after my power work is when I'm going to get on the court actually, and I'm going to kind of bridge whatever my focus of the day. I work in a anterior posterior split. So if it was my posterior day, I'm going to be doing some longer jumps or bounds on the court, right? Like some free throw line layups, and then some. I even started adding in some bounds. Like I'm running into half court, and I got 3 steps, so I can get to the basket. Kind of like we were talking about earlier. Um, Adds in some of that hang time, that coordination in the air, and then I'll just get into my skill work. Those are going to be my more intensive days where I'm getting a lot more game like reps up, a lot more full speed stuff. Or it could even be a day where I play pickup or do some small
Yeah.
sided games. And then my low intensive days, we're going to have some sort of mobility. Maybe we'll add in some low intensive plyometrics here and there, and then just get all of our little weaknesses, anything that's giving us pain or issues, and then I like to finish with isos, ankle, pretty much all the joints, right? Ankle, knee, and hips. Get those adductors. That's something I just started adding in my isometrics. Get on the leg extension, and then do some sort of hip bridge. Usually, I do for the hammies or like a
Yeah.
Nordic isometric. But um,
Yeah, I like your point about the isometrics. It's really good for um, teaching someone how to like increase their neural drive, right? Without taxing the local muscle too much, right? Just in terms of, but you're not going to get that soreness sensation. Um, like there's scientific reasons for it that I won't get into, but basically, the muscle is not right stretching or contracting, right? Just staying at one. You're the muscle is just staying there, just like contracting at one specific like angle or length. So you're not really going to cause any soreness per se. And also, it doesn't seem like you have to do a whole bunch of volume or a whole bunch of time with the contraction either. Like as long as you're pushing super hard. Yeah,
yeah,
so I think that's a really good way, and it's really good for your joints too. Just getting that joint compression and that like pretty like maximal load to the joint. Yeah.
yeah. So I saw a study about because you're kind of in terms of that max force component, like you're kind of thinking more on like overcoming isometrics. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I saw some research about how because like a lot of isometrics for the longest time were like 3 minutes straight or like a long amount of time. It can actually be more beneficial to increase that weight, and you're not really getting any more benefits in terms of time after about 20 seconds. So I like to keep my isometrics around that 20-second range, and I go pretty
Mhm.
heavy on them, and it's something very easily scalable, especially on the leg extension or something like that. Um, and then, do you want to get into your sort of your monthly um, your monthly wickets that you try to hit in training?
Yeah, I guess just one more thing about the isometric. So, right, there's two types. So, overcoming is where you have a load that's too heavy where you can't move it, right? It's like if I were to tell you, like a whole body isometric is like, hey, try to push this brick wall
Yeah,
and move it from point A to point B. You're not going to be able to do it, but the point with that is like you're essentially trying to push as hard as you can, right? Versus another isometric. I believe some of the research is a little different. Some people call like holding isometrics. What have you heard? The other ones. Let's say you just hold a
it's
split
on the
squat for like 3 minutes
yeah, it's on the
straight.
tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
I'm not
Um,
gonna come up.
but yeah. Anyways, they have different. So I just want to explain the two terms, and they have different uses, I think, and different benefits. So I know for like tendon health per se, I think some of the research I was reading, they found that overcoming isometrics actually weren't as effective for tendinopathies. Um, Part of it, I think, is because like maybe the subjects weren't pushing their hardest per se. Because that's the one thing with overcoming isometrics, I think, is could be a downside is if the athlete is not pushing themselves to their full capability, that's an issue, right? Because you're not going to be able to move the weight anyways, even if you try 10% or 100%. So it's like it's kind of hard to gauge that, and only truly the only person who knows is the person doing the exercise itself.
Yeah,
Versus like if I told you to hold like a wall sit or a split squat for 3 minutes, right? Like I can tell when you're not, pushing
yeah,
yourself in the
yeah.
sense.
There's an easier gauge for that.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, especially I wouldn't call what I do like overcoming. They're just
Mm-hmm.
heavier and around
Yeah.
that 20-second time frame. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely in the early stages of a tendinopathy, you want to get into that longer time frame just so your body has more time actually activating that muscle, like we've talked about before. And yeah, 100% everything you said.
All right. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Into the monthly programming, I think I think you probably have a better idea of this just because this is something my mentor at OT, Trek Norris, said. He said, like PTs were good at like day to day in terms of like programming and what exercises to do, but that when you zoom out and the programming, it's not necessarily um, something that's emphasized like in the PT world per se. And then you also like if you're in a sports setting, a lot of times you're working with like the strength and conditioning. Like you should be working with your strength and conditioning coaches, and they tend to be better about like programming or like periodization, right? Like working on certain qualities at certain times for certain lengths. Um, so for me, I think that's still something I definitely want to get better at. Yeah, so I want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my training blocks are usually going to be about a month long, 4 to 5 weeks. Um, with on paper, there's going to be a deload week, but I feel like that usually comes kind of naturally in most people's day to day lives. Like, there's going to be times where you're too busy for the gym. If you can go 2 months straight, like just get out of it because there's probably going to be a 2 week block where you're not going to be able to use the gym or something's going to happen. So on paper, there's a deload week. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I find oftentimes you don't actually need it because you end up deloading on your own, take a week off or anything like that. But um, in terms of a strategic aspect and how I kind of try to break up the blocks, my first block is usually going to be more strength based, um, just building that general capacity. Um, and then we're going to get into more power work. Or how can we turn
Mm-hmm.
this strength into and move it faster and a little bit more coordinated. And then usually in the power phase, I'll have some more eccentric focus work. Um, and then speed is going to be about going from that eccentric to that concentric. So
Mhm.
just a lot more like some French contrast work or something like that can be a part of that. But those are usually my three big blocks, my big points. Is we got our strength, we got our power, we got our speed. Um, how many different planes can we hit in terms of vertical, horizontal, and lateral throughout those three
Mhm.
phases? It's going to depend on the athlete, but um, yeah, that's kind of my idea on programming from a long-term basis. Obviously, it's easier
Mhm.
when you know what we're going to be doing, and it's always you can always write out the perfect program, but you're going to have to make adjustments on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
That's just how it works. It kind of surprised me that you said that PTs are more of a daily sort of focus thing. Is that just because of like volume that you guys can see at like a clinic or somewhere you work, or is that just because of how maybe the classroom piece is structured?
You know, I think a lot of factors into it. Just because we are working with people who are like injured, right? Generally, you don't necessarily have to focus on overtaxing them per se, right? It's hard to approach failure or approach the fatigue levels if you're dealing with an injury, because like one, it's like they're not able to push to that sense, or that like approach of failure isn't like something else is going to fail before it's your like muscles per se or like your performance aspect. It's like more like pain levels, right? Or like comfort with a certain exercise or movement. That's going to be more of a limiting factor than like how much weight can you push, like are you strong enough, kind of thing.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, part of it's the volume where you like if you work at like a traditional PT or like an outpatient place, like you see a lot of people, um, and your focus kind of has to be more day to day and having them feel a bit better, right? Not necessarily, you don't always have to have them feeling better leaving the clinic, but you kind of think of it better short time frames too, just because like coming back from an injury, it's not as for a lot of injuries, for most injuries, it's not going to be like this 3 4 month like hopefully thing, right? It's like try to get them better 6 weeks time. Um, like for instance, like acute low back pain. Generally, most people get better, or maybe not necessarily back to 100%, but basically all the way there by 6 weeks. It's like, okay, what can I do to speed that healing process up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or not even necessarily healing, but have them feeling better before the 6 weeks. Which in case like I'm not thinking about periodization or like
Yeah.
like oh like 4 months out from this and we're gonna switch it up kind of thing. Um, yeah, and then that's what you tend to learn at school too, which is why like working with people coming back from ACL surgeries has been like something really fun for me, uh, and challenging in a good way, because you have to think about that actual 9 month period now. Where it's like, okay, I'm gonna push them hard today in the weight room, like things like that. But it can't just be about that daily. It's like, okay, let me zoom out. What is the big picture? Like, what are they going to get back to doing? And like, when do we work on certain things of conditioning? When do we put all our focus on strength, right? Um, so that's yeah, it's definitely something I'm trying to get better at, and definitely getting better at with more experience and working with more post-op patients. But yeah, that's why it's a little bit different, I think, in the rehab world versus strict performance-wise. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of how I feel about like going from just like a straight skill development coach to going to I just call it like player develop. It's just more player development now. I would say, um, in terms of like I now that I'm in the online space, I can kind of manage all of my athletes' training
Mm-hmm.
rather than before when it was just like you're showing up on a Tuesday to get an hour of work. It's kind of that same idea that you were saying with like acute pain. and it's like just try and get him better. I don't really know if I'm going to see him again. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to have to hunt down his mom to get my $20 for my session or whatever it was. Like when I first started out, but it was a lot of the same sort of idea, and you know, just like obviously I make my plans, but then you use 60% of it because you see him doing something that you thought he
Mhm.
could do, but now you have to scale it back, and he's
Yep.
either getting it or he's not, and you start at the goal and you scale your way back as much as they need. But that is definitely why I like the online portion, because I can kind of control everything, and that's how. And I think I'm better at that because that's how I've always taken my own training. That's how I've always
Mhm.
gotten better. And so being able
Yep.
to have them record different things that they do, and knowing everything that they're doing throughout the week, and if pain comes up, I can manage that. And it's definitely more fun being a coach, and on this side, like that programming piece is the most challenging and rewarding side of it, I think. But, all right, man, we're a little over an hour. You got anything else?
No, I think we've pretty much covered what we wanted to cover.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, this was the Do Better podcast again. Make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe. We're going to be coming out with shorts. Make sure you guys check out our Instagram, Do Better _ pod. Um, yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Yep.